What is up everyone, this is Nishi from MST.TV here. In today's video, I am going to present you all with some of my Yu-Gi-Oh investment ideas for the next couple of months. These are cards that I think are going to go up in price, either because they're going to see an increase in play, or they're related to an archetype that is coming out soon or getting more support. Obviously, these are just speculative. If I could see into the future and tell you guys what was going to be happening on the market, I'd be looking at the actual stock market instead of Yu-Gi-Oh! Whatever. Please, therefore, take my words with a grain of salt here and try to do your best, to do your own research before you make any decisions, rather than just trust the opinion of some random guy online. However, as someone who buys and sells Yu-Gi-Oh cards a lot and has done so for several years, I am fairly confident in my decisions. In fact, these are all cards that I have personally already decided to invest in on my own. So yeah, let's get into it. Okay, so first up we have Dragonic Diagram. So I believe the Kali Effect actually talked about this card in his investments video, and I'm definitely going to say that I think he's right on the money here. This is something that I've had my eye on for quite a while as well. Now, on one hand, True Draco Unchained looks like, in my opinion, the strongest variant of Unchained. I think that the two archetypes synergize really well together, and even though we probably aren't going to see Unchained as a top tier deck, this particular variant is probably going to be doing some damage and topping a few regionals or something like that. At the same time, True Draco is still a really strong anti-meta deck on its own, and it has been for the last few months. We always seem to see the deck pop up here or there. Dragonic Diagram is really the key card that enables a lot of the synergy between True Draco and Unchained, as well as gets the whole True Draco strategy going. So expect the price of this card to increase after Chaos Impact has dropped. Right now, you're looking at only around $7 to $8 for a single copy of this card, for all variants. Personally, I would be trying to grab sets for around $20 if you can. Remember that even though this card has been reprinted twice, both of them are secret rares, and this card was relatively difficult to pull, so there's lots of potential for this card to increase pretty significantly in terms of price. So next, let's take a look at Dual Devastator. So I feel like a lot of people are kind of disregarding the cards from this set because of how cheap they are, and I feel like this always happens when you're guaranteed the contents of a particular product. If you guys remember, with cards like Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring in the Salamangreat structure deck, and then Chimera Tech Mega Fleet Dragon in the Legendary Dragon decks, these cards were initially only a couple of dollars, and people thought that their prices couldn't go that high. However, the thing about products like these is that they're locked behind a paywall, right? Most players don't want to pay $10 for the structure deck just to get an Ash Blossom, or $40 for the 3 decks just to get the Mega Fleet Dragon. So a lot of people resort to buying singles, and this almost always causes the prices to increase steadily over time. So when we look at Dual Devastator, we can try to identify cards that are similar to this, right? Of course, there are obvious choices in Saryuja and Super Polymerization, but I feel like those are kind of on everyone's radar, so we aren't going to cover them here. Rather, the first one I want to look at is Ghost Belt and Haunted Mansion, which I feel like is kind of the underrated hand trap at the moment. It has seen a fair amount of play over the last year or so, definitely more than when the card first came out, but hasn't really seen much play with the popularity of Nibiru and Infinite Impermanence. However, at only $2, I think that Ghost Belt is definitely a card that you should be holding onto. Remember that outside of this, it has fewer reprints than a card like Ash Blossom or Ghost Ogre, so there are fewer alternatives and therefore more potential for the card to increase in price. The next card is Mind Control, which I believe is just an absolutely ridiculously broken card going second. In fact, I've actually noticed some people moving this from the side deck to the main deck just because of how strong it is. I think that as more and more people pick up on this and start using the card, it's going to gradually go up, especially as a holo version of a really strong card that has historically, even as a common, been worth a little bit. Even the commons were a few dollars before. And the last card here from Dual Devastator is Called by the Grave. I believe that this card is actually very underused in the current format because it isn't effective against Nibiru and Infinite Impermanence, which are the two biggest, most important hand traps at the moment. However, I feel like as the format rotates and develops and other hand traps are going to see an increase in favor eventually, it's actually pretty likely that we'll see Called by the Grave increase in price as well. This card has historically always been worth at least a couple of dollars, right? Even when it was a common, we saw that common hit a peak of $4 to $5 a copy. So there's a very good chance that we could see all of its holo prints across the board just go up in the near future as well. Okay, now we have Mech Knight Crusadia Avra-MAX. So this is a Link 4 monster from Dark Neostorm that can be made with any 2 monsters that were summoned from the extra deck. I believe that this card is going to go up in price because it can be played alongside IP Masquerena, a new card that we are getting in Chaos Impact, allowing you to make an indestructible, untargetable 3000 attack point body. I think that this card is going to be really scary if decks pick up on using this in their strategies. Now, this isn't necessarily something that you should invest into a lot of copies of. I think that maybe just having 3 should be fine, since you generally aren't going to be playing more than 1 in your deck, and everyone only needs 1. Also, remember that the card is relatively new from a main set, which does mean that in 2020, we should expect it to be reprinted in either Battles of Legend type set or the Megatons. So yeah, definitely something you're not going to really want to hold on to for a very long time. However, as a card that you can currently pick up for only like $15 or so, I could very easily see this card going up to around $25 to $30 within the next month or so. Next, let's take a look at Nightmare Unicorn. So Unicorn is an interesting card because it has an effect that triggers when the card is summoned, meaning that if you can make it during your opponent's turn, you are able to potentially disrupt them mid-combo. So on one hand, this means you can make it with IP Masquerena, which might be an alternative to Avra-MAX, maybe if you aren't able to put enough bodies onto the board or you really need to provide disruption on your opponent. However, this card can also be summoned in Unchained, using Unchained Spirit of Rage and one of your opponent's monsters, allowing you to not only link off one of their monsters with Rage's effect to make the Unicorn, but also allowing you to spin another card. Now, while Unicorn is no longer a $40 card, it is still worth a few dollars, right? We have the ultra rare reprint from the Megatons that's currently only like $3 to $4, maybe $5. We also have the original secret rare one, which should be anywhere from like $8 to $10. If you're able to afford the secret rare, that's the one I would grab, since I think they look like a lot nicer than the ultras. In my mind, they could potentially reach like $15 to $20. I actually thought that Nightmare Unicorn, as a very like staple extra deck monster, because it provides access to spot removal, I thought it was going to be included in Dual Devastator. So when I saw that it wasn't included in there, I kind of instantly decided that it's a card that everyone should be picking up and holding onto, right? Even if you're not looking to play Unchained or you're not looking to use IP Masquerena to make this card necessarily, I think it's a card that you should pick up and hold onto because it is so staple and it's kind of always going to be in some sort of demand. Okay, so these 2 cards are admittedly a little bit weirder, and I feel like no one's really talking about them. However, with the introduction of the new Raigeki / Harpy's Feather Duster card in Ignition Assault, we finally have a way to clear all spells and traps on your opponent's side of the field in a single card without having to go into the extra deck, right? A card that's kind of like Heavy Storm or Harpy's Feather Duster kind of fundamentally changes the way that people play Yu-Gi-Oh! Like, the fact that such a card exists means that any deck can blow out a deck like Subterror or Altergeist like completely out of the water with just a single card if they don't have an appropriate answer. Therefore, I believe that there's some potential for these 2 cards to see some sort of play once this new card comes out. So Starlight Road is a normal trap, but it provides board presence by summoning Stardust Dragon onto the field when it resolves, providing you with an additional, although like situational negate. This card may be an option for decks like Subterror or Altergeist, which are back row heavy, but also not particularly dependent on the extra deck. However, the Huge Revolution is over may be an option for people who can't afford to give up that extra deck slot. Also, you should note that Huge Revolution is over is a counter trap rather than a normal trap, so it isn't susceptible to as much negation as Starlight Road is. Now, these are both really cheap cards, right? Like Starlight Road in Secret Rare version, which is really nice, is only like $1 or so. And Huge Revolution is over is only available as a common, so it should be reasonably cheap and easy to pick up. However, these are cards that, like, as a player, I would just want to pick up sets of just in case they happen to ever become relevant again. They're kind of going to be annoying to have to go out of your way to find those copies of. So next up, Block Dragon is an interesting card. I think we actually saw this card used in some variants of Burning Abyss, although in that deck I believe it was just used to pull Power Giant out of the deck. However, we do have a new archetype coming out in Ignition Assault known as Megaliths. So this is a ritual based deck. where the monsters allow you to conduct ritual summons without using the spells as quick effects. Block Dragon, I believe, is pretty easy to summon in that deck, and when you do, you can link it off and then search for more of the ritual monsters. I think you can actually search for 2 because a bunch of them are level 4s. Now, I don't think that this deck is going to be good. In all honesty, it feels really underwhelming. However, I think this won't stop people from wanting to play the deck, maybe like casual players or someone who's really dedicated to playing all the different ritual decks. Shout out to Cody from my locals. Currently, Block Dragon is only like 50 cents or $1 or so. So if you're able to snag them for cheap, I would definitely do so. I'm just looking at Block Dragon as like that potential card that could go up because we finally have this like rock themed archetype. So it's something I kind of have my eye on. I don't think the card is going to be a hit or see any really crazy prices or anything like that, but it could very well become like a $5 card or so by the time Ignition Assault comes out. Next, I know we've talked about this card a couple of times before, but if you don't already own your copies of Nibiru, I would absolutely be picking them up now. Now, over the last little while, we've seen Nibiru played quite a bit, both in the TCG and the OCG. In fact, it is such a strong card that we're seeing it moved from the side deck even to the main deck. I think it's kind of like Max C, right? Where even though it's not strong in every single matchup, it's too strong in those matchups that it's good against that you kind of just have to accept the risk and play it anyways. We are currently looking at around $10 for this card, so it's up from like that $7.50 to $8.50 range that we saw before. If you don't have this card now, I don't really know what you're waiting for. Like, I don't see this card going much lower than where it is right now because of how popular and how strong it is. But at the same time, as a 10 promo, there's a cap as to how high this card's price can get theoretically, right? There's actually a really high quantity of this card available on TCG Player at the moment, so it is going to take a while for the card to go up in price. But the longer that this card goes without a reprint, the higher its price is going to go, because we're just going to see quantities of this card gradually eaten off the market. It is still only a couple of months old, right? Like the Megatins came out just at the end of August. So it's going to be quite a while before we see a reprint, like at least a year, I would expect. But rather than risking the card going up in price, I think it's definitely much safer to go ahead and grab your copies of this card now. Okay guys, and finally we are going to talk about Generaids. So this archetype is a level 9 base deck that is coming out in Mystic Fighters, a set that we're going to be getting next month. In the previous investment recommendation video, we looked at World Legacy Monstrosity and Return of the Dragon Lords as cards to invest in for Generaids and Dragon Maids respectively. Now, however, we're going to look at a few other cards that might be able to be used with the Generaid archetype. Lonefire Blossom is the first one, as it is able to summon out Mardol, Generaid of Light, from the deck, who searches for any Generaid card when she is normal or special summoned. Now, as a deck that revolves around level 9 monsters, right, this deck can brick fairly easily, so Lonefire Blossom is an important card to help get the deck going. Also, Lonefire Blossom is a card that has historically always been worth a couple of dollars, right? Like even for the common or the rare or the Fusion Enforcers Super, it's kind of like a Manju or a Lure of Darkness, in that no matter how many times we see it get reprinted, it's always finding a way to be worth like a couple of dollars. The next one is number 9, Dyson Sphere. This card is from way back in Abyss Rising, and it has actually never been reprinted since then. As a number monster, it is pretty collectible, especially the Ultimate Rare First Edition version. However, this card might be kind of cute to see play in Generaid. If your opponent controls a monster with more attack points than it, it can attack your opponent directly, which can help you to cheese out wins or win you the game in time, right? And then finally, Nightmare Incarnation Idly looks like a potentially pretty decent tech option, right? Like if you're going second, it can be a free level 9 body onto the board, and it can potentially send all Link monsters to the graveyard. And note that's send, not destroy, which is really key. And of course, it can also protect your level 9 monsters from being destroyed by cards like Torrential Tribute or Ghost Ogre and Snow Rabbit. So yeah, I'm not saying that Generaids are going to be a strong deck or a meta deck or anything like that, but what I am saying is that there's a good chance that people are inevitably going to want to play and build the deck. These cards are going to disappear in quantity from the market, which is going to cause the prices to go up. So yeah, obviously these aren't cards that I would go out and pay like full market price on, right? Especially for a deck that really I don't think is that good. But if you can find a way to grab them for cheap, maybe like $1, a couple dollars here or there, why not, right? But yeah, so invest in these cards at your own caution, right? It's one thing to know what cards you should be buying, but it's just as important to know, to be able to identify when you should be selling a given card as well. Alright guys, so that is it from me for this video. Hopefully you guys found it a little bit helpful. It's always important to look ahead to the future, not just in terms of what decks are going to be good, but also what decks are going to be getting new support or what archetypes are coming out, because those things can present opportunities for us to invest in certain cards and net a profit as a result. So yeah, if you guys did enjoy this video and find it informative at least a bit, please give this video a thumbs up. And of course, make sure you guys hit that subscribe button too. Also, please comment down below. Let me know what cards you guys are investing in that you think are going to go up in price over the next little while. I'm particularly curious about the Senka and at Ignister archetypes, right? I was trying to figure out what cards to invest in for those decks, but outside of like Ultimate Rare Tenki and then maybe Lady Debug and then the video game promos, there wasn't really anything that comes to mind. So please let me know what you guys are thinking. You guys probably know the decks a lot better than I do. But yeah, and of course guys, don't forget to hold on to your MST.TV.